Hello again everyone, welcome back to another informative episode of Agri Words and Phrases. In this episode we are going to talk about transpiration. Now in talking about transpiration we are going to first give a basic definition of what transpiration is. And the word transpiration we are going to basically relate it to plants. So we are talking about transpiration in plants. We are going to also just give a brief overview of the word evapotranspiration, because you cannot talk about transpiration and not talk about evapotranspiration. And of course, we are going to also talk about some advantages and disadvantages of transpiration in plants. Now, transpiration is a very important process within plants. Without transpiration, the plants would simply overheat and die. So take for example, in human beings or in us, we perspiration. So therefore we sweat. And by sweating, our body cools down. So it's the same thing with the plants. The plants transpire or go through a process of transpiration where they lose water. And this water that they lose enables them to cool down. Now, a basic definition of transpiration is simply a process by which plants loses water in order to cool down itself, right? Because when the plant loses water, it is essentially cooling down its system. Now, what is evapotranspiration? Remember earlier I said that in talking about transpiration, we also have to talk about evapotranspiration. Now, evapotranspiration is basically evaporation and transpiration coming together. Essentially, during evaporation, water evaporates from the earth or the soil to the atmosphere. And during transpiration, water is lost from the plants to the atmosphere. So we cannot just say that the water that is in the atmosphere is due to evaporation, because the plant also transpires water, right? The plant also loses water to the atmosphere. So it's basically a combination of evaporation from the soil and transpiration from the plant. So you put those two words together, we call evapotranspiration. As you can see, evapotranspiration is actually a very good word because it gives you a good idea of the amount of water that is lost to the atmosphere from the soil and also from the plants. Now let us move on to the advantages of transpiration. The first advantage is it helps to maintain turgidity or rigidity, or the rigidness of the plant, right? The ability of the plant to really stand firm without drooping over or wilting. So it helps to maintain that. And by maintaining that, how it does this is it maintains the water balance of the cells, right? So the cells of the plant has enough water to ensure that the rigidness of the plant itself, or the turgidity of the plant itself, is maintained. So transpiration ensures that enough water is in those cells. Therefore, we can safely say it helps with the water balance of the cells. Now, the next advantage is it helps to maintain the mineral ion balance of the plant or of the plant cells. We all know that plants uptake nutrients or minerals from the growing medium or soil. Now, transpiration helps to ensure that the plant is properly or optimally pulling up these nutrients or these ions from the soil in order to maintain that ionic balance within the plant, right? Because without the plant pulling up these nutrients or these ions, it will not have the energy to support growth and development. Now, another advantage is it helps with the cooling of the plant or the cooling of the leaves. Now, let us talk a little bit about this cooling mechanism of the plant. The plant cools down itself by transpiring. So when the plant transpires and loses water, it is basically cooling down its system. This cooling effect, we can also refer to it as evaporative cooling. And evaporative cooling is also the same as latent heat loss. So latent heat loss is basically the leaves or the plant losing heat by the transpiration of water. So the water that it transpires is actually taking away the heat from the leaf. That is how the plant cools down itself. So as you can see, this is a very good advantage of transpiration, and also one of the main advantages of transpiration, the whole mechanism of cooling. Another advantage of transpiration is it helps in the uptake of water from the soil. So because the plant is losing water to the atmosphere because of evaporative demand, you find that it is pulling water from the soil. So while it's pulling water from the soil, it is losing water through the leaves, through transpiration. So the water converts from liquid in the leaf into vapor form or gaseous form. The water does not leave the leaf and sprout in the atmosphere in a mist or in a water state or in a liquid state. It is converted to gaseous form, right? That is why earlier you heard me using the term latent heat loss, or we can say evaporative heat loss or evaporative cooling, right? Because latent heat loss deals with the whole change in state from solid to liquid or from liquid to gas. So within the leaves, we know that the water is in liquid form within the leaf, right? And then it converts from the liquid form to gaseous form, what we call a water vapor. And then the water vapor evaporates into the atmosphere. So what happens is that when it evaporates into the atmosphere, it basically interacts with temperature, and then we get our clouds forming. Like for example, our cumulus clouds forming. When the clouds, when it gets too saturated, then it falls, it precipitates and falls back as rain. This is what happens. So as I said, the transpiration helps with the uptake of water. So, and this is what essentially causes proper turgidity or rigidity of the plants. That is why, and we are going to talk about this in another video, that is why when relative humidity is basically high, the transpiration process is relatively low, because the evaporative demand of the atmosphere is much lower, and the amount of water in the atmosphere is high. Therefore, the evaporative demand is reduced, and the plant doesn't really have to transpire that much, right? The major disadvantage of transpiration is that you find that if you are not supplying enough water to the soil, to the growing medium for the plant to uptake, and the plant is rapidly going through its transpiration process where it is rapidly losing water to the atmosphere. If you are not watering your plants right, the plant can go through water stress or heat stress, and when it is going through heat stress, it's basically going to close its stomata to lose less water, to conserve on what it has in order to continue growing. So as you can see, once you maintain a good temperature for plants to grow, and you also supply the plants with adequate water, you find that transpiration will continue. Even when temperatures are high, if temperatures are high and you supply the plant with adequate amount of water, transpiration will still occur. But transpiration basically reduces because the plant closes their stomata when they sense that enough water is not there in the growing medium for it to take up, right? So if they were to keep their stomata open, the evaporative demand of the atmosphere is high, then you find that they would basically dry out, wilt, and die. My advice to you is that while growing, ensure that you provide your plants with adequate amount of water so that it can feed into the whole transpiration process, because essentially this is how the plant cools down itself. Can you imagine if the plant couldn't cool down itself, what would happen? Can you imagine if you could not sweat as a human, if you could not perspire and lose water? Can you imagine how your body would overheat? We might not be able to have everything as optimal as possible. Especially in the Caribbean, we are in the tropics. We tend to have high temperatures, and if we know that high temperatures can cause high transpiration rate, then we have to equip ourselves, our farm, to deal with that. And one way to deal with that is ensure that you are providing adequate amount of water, because as I said before, if the temperature is high and adequate amount of water is there, then the transpiration process will be faster. However, the plant will have water pulling on, but this would mean that you would be using a lot of water resource. Try to do as much as you can to grow the plants in the right temperature that they need in order to have a balance in the transpiration process, which will help you to be more efficient in providing adequate water for the plants. I hope you understand the transpiration process, understand what transpiration is. As usual, please leave any questions or comments below, and please remember to subscribe to my channel. I'll see you again in another video. Thank you.